When I hear the term regional planning, to be honest, it doesn't conjure up a lot of excitement. But consider this. We expect more than 1 million people to move here over the next 25 years. We need housing and jobs for these people, and we need to continue protecting our sensitive ecosystems. How do we plan for this and get it right? The Regional Planning Committee looks through a long-range integrated lens to ensure we develop healthy, resilient, and complete communities now and into the future. Let's meet Jonathan Cote. He is the chair of the Regional Planning Committee at Metro Vancouver, and he's going to tell us a bit more about the regional growth strategy, which is called Metro Vancouver 2040, Shaping Our Future. Welcome, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, Jenny, and it's a pleasure to be here. You know, I know when we think of regional planning, it doesn't always naturally come up as the most exciting thing people think about. But you know, I think if we look at Metro Vancouver and what we love about the places we live, really those successes, whether it's a protection of green space or the complete and wonderful neighborhoods that we have in Metro Vancouver, all of that was built upon decades and decades of regional planning in our region.
You know, when I actually read the strategy and started to think about it, I thought, wow, this is so neat. It's really fascinating. And I imagine for you in your position and the work that the committee is doing, you're just kind of shaping our future too. I mean, that just must be so fascinating and interesting.
No, well, it's interesting looking at the region we have, but thinking forward 20, 30, 40 years into the future and all the different variations of where the region can go. You know, in some ways you kind of feel like a bit of a kid in the candy store shaping the region. But we have decades of really strong regional planning in the region to build upon those successes from. And I think that's what really makes it easier in our region to do our long range planning.
And you have a background in regional planning as well?
Yeah, my educational background is in urban planning. So, you know, definitely it's pretty excited to be able to kind of work in this realm every day, shaping my own community in New Westminster, but also at the regional table here at Metro Vancouver.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got the right person in the right place. So let's dive a little deeper into the actual regional growth strategy. What are the main goals?
Yeah, well, Metro 2040 is probably the most important planning document in Metro Vancouver. It really does shape the region. It integrates with all of the municipalities that make up the Metro Vancouver region, and it's really guided by some major goals and themes. The first one is building compact and complete communities, and what that really speaks to is building communities where people live in neighborhoods that have all the amenities, have the shopping, have the parks and recreation, the natural areas, have access to employment. Compact in that, you know, when we do have greater densities, we're able to actually better connect and build those mixed-use neighborhoods. The second major goal is building a sustainable economy. You know, I think any major city, you know, relies on a strong economy, and really how it fits into the regional context is how do we make sure that we're protecting and ensuring that there's place for employment in a region and that we're attracting the right employment. The third major goal is really protecting the environment and tackling climate change. And I think, you know, that's really embedded into one of the strongest values, you know, that we really face with all the residents in Metro Vancouver is how do we make sure we're building a region that protects our natural spaces, protects our agricultural land, and is doing everything we can to address, you know, probably one of the biggest global challenges that all cities are facing is tackling climate change. And the final one that brings it all together is how do we connect and transport through the region, and it's really about building a region that has strong access and supports sustainable transportation, and this being public transit, walking and cycling, and how do we build communities there. And it's those goals all working together that really do help shape all the work we do here at Metro Vancouver in regional planning, but it also seeps into all the work that the individual municipalities do as well.
It sounds incredibly complex. How do you actually implement some of these things? It's one thing to write it, you know, out on a piece of paper and plan it out and produce this glossy document, but how do you implement?
Yeah,
these
well,
goals?
you know, developing a plan can be the fun part, but implementing the plan can be the challenging part. But you know, I think the reasons we've had success in Metro Vancouver is the collaboration we have with all of the cities within Metro Vancouver. The planning document really does represent that broad, high-level planning to really kind of demonstrate where growth should occur, where do we want different uses, where do we want our regional town centers, and that can be really powerful focus, and that influences how each of the cities does their local planning, how their official community plan works. I think more practically speaking as well too, Metro Vancouver has a strong influence on the urban containment boundary, and that has a huge role in actually shaping where growth occurs in the region. There's other parts in the world that don't have those types of controls in place, and what you see is growth just sprawls out and out and out, and there's no controls over that, and you end up with growth not happening in the right areas.
And that's urban sprawl.
Exactly.
Can you give me an example of how you are able to control it?
Yeah, well, I think a good tool is the sewage expansion area that Metro Vancouver uses as a tool. There are areas that are designated rural or natural areas that simply are not going to have access to sewer and water. Well, if you don't have access to sewer and water, you're likely not going to be a very developable area in the region, and that's probably one of the most powerful tools that the region has used to be able to help shape growth and make sure the growth is happening in the right area in the region.
I was really surprised when I read that. It's like, right, we just won't allow any sewage pipes to go there, and there you have it. You can't develop in that area. It's very simple, but it's very effective.
Simple but effective tool, yeah.
When we think about what's happened with the pandemic, how flexible is a regional plan like this to incorporate, again, the impact of COVID? There's a lot of people right now that may not be working. There are people that are working from home. How flexible is the plan? Yeah,
well, I think Metro 2040 is incredibly flexible and is really designed to be a living document. And I think that's absolutely critical with a long-range plan because, I think we can do our best guess to start to plan out the different scenarios in the decades to come, but none of us has a crystal ball. So these documents do have to be living documents. They do have to be flexible enough that they can be changed. And I think one of the most recent examples is over the past 10 years, although climate change was always embedded and environmental protection was embedded in our regional plans, that has become a bigger and more important issue over the last number of years. And recently, we've actually made amendments to Metro 2040 to actually better incorporate targets and goals, showing that this is a living document that will change as the times go. And I think there's some core values and goals, like I mentioned before, that I think will always be strong core values and goals that help us guide through unpredictable times in the future. But you also have to have a plan that has that flexibility that can change into the future.
What about adding more resiliency to the plan?
It's so critical that we ensure our region is designing resiliency into everything we do. Whether it's the housing we're building or the offices we're building or the transit infrastructure or the pipes under the ground, a lot of those buildings and that infrastructure is going to be around for 100 years. And it has to be designed, thought through, and planned in a way that it not only serves residents today, but is also able to still continue to serve residents long into the future. So resilience has to be embedded in the work we do, because moving forward, today we're dealing with a global health crisis. Tomorrow we might be dealing with an economic challenge, and in the future we might be dealing with some very negative impacts because of climate change. And we have to be able to be designing our cities and our infrastructure to be able to respond and be resilient towards that.
It seems we're really lucky here in Metro Vancouver that a lot of thought has already gone into our planning and our future plans. Can you give me an example, though, of what things might look like if things are not planned out well?
Good planning is absolutely essential, and I think a lot of the benefits we have in Metro Vancouver and the things we love about our region is really embedded in that. And I think the biggest risk of not doing proper long-range regional planning is that as a city grows, and Metro Vancouver is still growing very fast, that growth might not happen in the right way, the growth might not end up in the right places, and you might not be connecting the right uses together. People might not live close to their work or close to the amenities there. And what often happens is you end up with a region that adopts urban sprawl, where it just kind of grows haphazardly and growing in every direction. And urban sprawl has long been documented to be a source of less livable communities, more health problems in the communities, and really doesn't align with the environmental and sustainability goals that we have here in Metro Vancouver. So I think that's why it's so critically important that we delve in, because if we just let the city design itself, it may not end up in the future that we have, and it may not protect things like our natural areas or our farmland the way we want to. Those things don't happen by accident.
Just so that I understand and people understand what that looks like in terms of urban sprawl. So that might be people actually live out in the suburbs and then have to drive long commute times into the city to work,
and then other places to go shop. Is that really what you're talking about?
Exactly. You know, it just means unplanned growth where the growth just happens and continues to expand the region farther and farther out, meaning there are greater distances to get from point A to point B, no matter where you're going. Often means communities that are far more car dependent. And, you know, I think when you put it together, it just leads to types of the communities that just doesn't fit with the, you know, what's been the goals and aspirations for this region over the last 50 years.
And then let's flip that around. Regional planning, when done well, what's your vision when you look out to 2040, 2050?
Yeah, well, you know, Metro Vancouver is, you know, currently embarking on our update of Metro 2040, developing Metro 2050 along with TransLink in the development of Transport 2050. And, you know, what we're trying to do in that work is not to reinvent the wheel, but we're trying to build upon the successes that we have had in the region. You know, I think there is really good consensus that, you know, a lot of the good values and goals that we've set before are still relevant today. And, you know, I think how we can see it into the future is to continue to be able to build on that, keep a focus on those goals, but also recognize that, you know, how have things changed since the last time we dealt with our long-range plan. You know, even looking at, you know, the impacts of COVID-19 on the plan, you know, one simple thing like the trend towards work from home. Now, if that becomes a more sustained trend, that could actually be a potentially really positive thing, but it has to be embedded into the long-range plan. So, you know, now's a really good opportunity to not rewrite our long-range plan, but how do we build upon it and respond to some of the changing factors that our region has been going through over the past decade and it will be going into the future.
Collaboration is a really unique key piece of Metro Vancouver. Can you drill down for me and give me a very specific example of what collaboration might look like when it comes to regional planning?
Yeah, well, you know, I think that's one of the greatest successes of Metro Vancouver and why it's been able to achieve what it can in all of its areas that it works in is that it is really a federation of all of the municipalities and Metro Vancouver finding some big regional issues that where we recognize we're better working together than working individually on, and I think that's where we get our successes. When it comes to regional planning, it's have that coordination because, you know, I think of the work we're doing in planning in New Westminster, we could come up with great ideas and put growth in certain areas, but the reality is we're one small municipality in a larger region, and if that growth doesn't make sense or doesn't connect to our neighbors in Coquitlam or Burnaby or Surrey or Richmond, well then the whole region doesn't work as effectively together. So it's how do we coordinate as a region and decide in each municipality where does it make the most sense for growth to be, where should employment be located, where are regional town centers, how do we want to start to connect these by public transportation, and how do we effectively do that? And really the best way to do that is for us to all be working together and collaboratively together.
Thank you so much for this. This was really interesting, Jonathan.
No, thank you.
Jonathan Cote is the chair of the Metro Vancouver Regional Planning Committee, and he is the mayor of New Westminster.